Hello and welcome to Spring Office Hours, Season 3, Episode 10, Batch Processing with Spring. My name is Dan Vega, Spring Developer Advocate at Broadcom, joined by my good friend and colleague, DaShaun. DaShaun, how are you doing?
Hi, it's me. I'm the problem. It's me. How are you?
That's nice. That's nice. Taylor just came out on Disney Plus, so we both have girls. I'm a Taylor fan too, so we ended up watching it I think 2 or 3 times over the weekend.
Totally understand. I totally understand. It's Taylor's everywhere.
Yep.
And yeah, why not? I also saw the Spring Music demo, Taylor's version last week
Yep.
on Cloud Foundry Weekly. So yeah, I'm just trying to ride the ride.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for everyone to showing up to the stream off of a really big week last week. I was reminded last week just how much I love this community. We really appreciate the support. We see a lot of the regulars here on the live stream joining us here on YouTube. So if you don't know, we live stream every Monday from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then we will turn this into a podcast that you can go ahead and listen to afterwards. Take us on the run, take us on a walk, take us in the car, wherever you want to take us. You want to find out more, you can get all of our information over at springofficehours.io. And as DaShaun says, if you are here in the live stream and you don't ask your questions, we are not going to feel bad. It's your fault.
It's all your fault.
You got to ask your questions.
You have to. And thank you for letting us know where you're from because my mom and dad are always watching. Hi, Mom, Dad, I love you. And they love to see where everybody's joining from. It's always fun.
That's awesome. So we have a really interesting show today on batch processing with Spring. I'm excited about this because I am not an expert on Spring Batch. In fact, I've never even written any applications with Spring Batch. So I am here to learn today as well, through the community. And I mean, the Spring ecosystem is just massive, DaShaun. And so I want people out there to understand that, like, if you only know like one corner of it or the things that you're working with, that's okay. Because I get to do this every single day for the last almost 3 years, and I don't know everything. So, and I've been using Spring for, 10 years now. So, so don't feel bad about it. We are here to learn together, and it's gonna be a lot of fun. So
I wasn't the first one to congratulate you on your course. It's live. It's public. It's ready there. It's out there for everybody.
Well, I was going to mention that today. So I put together a course on Spring Boot 3. It really started with me looking. I've been a big fan of Free Code Camp forever. We used to use it as like prerequisites for the curriculum at the Coding Boot Camp. We said, hey, these are the courses you should be able to go through before you come in day 1 or day 0. You should have an idea of that. So I've been a big fan of Free Code Camp, and I was looking at it the one day. I was like, oh, there's not a ton of Spring content on there. I want to get something on there. So I asked around, I got in touch with them, and they said, yeah, we'd love to have you on the platform. I put together a curriculum on Spring Boot 3 based on some of the things we've done in workshops before. Added some like new stuff, like the new client abstractions, both the REST client and the JDBC client. Put it together in less than a week, got it ready, and he told me like 2 or 3 weeks ago it would be up, and so here we are. So
fantastic.
I'm excited about it. If you are new to Spring Boot 3 or interested in getting started with Spring Boot, I think it's a pretty good primer. It's 3.5 hours long. I trimmed it down from like 4.5 to 3.5. So yeah, I hope you enjoy it and excited that it's out there. So
fantastic.
Cool. What else? What's going on with you?
AI's a thing.
Yeah.
AI 0.8.1 got released. There's lots of new cool stuff. I think you're doing a talk on that as well.
I am.
I don't have any talks on it, but it's just like it's kind of a part of a lot of my talks.
Yep. I'm excited about it. I have been like following it from afar, and some of the things that you've been doing. We talked to Craig Walls. Craig's really like invested in it. He's doing all kinds of things, talking everywhere, showing us demos. So Craig's doing some cool stuff with it. And I finally got to sit down and like hack away last week. I blocked off all this time. I'm like, let me get this stuff put together. Got my presentation pretty close and really just dove in. And I was like, wow, this is just like, it's Spring, right? It's that abstraction level on top of the things you can do without Spring. But it makes it so much easier, and it works with all the like a lot of the big LLMs out there. And I was talking to you before the show. I found another cool thing in there. the integration with Spring Shell allows you to say, you know, Spring add, and then you can add something from one of the projects in the repositories there. You can add AI something. So you can basically say like Spring add AI JPA, like, hey, I want to do this. I'm creating a new JPA project. Can you add that code to my project? And it like says, here are all the things that I'm going to do. Would you like me to apply that? And I was like, wow, that is awesome. So yeah, I'm excited to talk more about AI in the future, mainly the near future. So next Thursday, I'm doing a webinar with our friends at JetBrains. So we're going to be talking about Spring and AI. So if you're interested, you can find out more. danvega.dev/speaking has all my events coming up. So that is going to be so much fun. And it just, you know, AI is it's just really running fast right now. It's like rapidly, everything's changing so fast.
It is. And a
So
lot
trying
of
to
it
keep up with
seems
it.
around the LLMs.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to like, hey, I feel like Spring AI is going to cover the bases,
Yeah.
or it already has for a lot
Yeah.
of things. You might have just heard the fans kicking off. I got a couple of LLMs deployed, and one of the things that I can do is I can put Spring Cloud Gateway in front, and I can have a bunch of models running locally, and I can say, hey, ask it. I can send a prompt into Spring Cloud Gateway, and I can actually have that sent to all the different models, and just I'll take the answer that comes back first.
Yep.
So I can do this like, hey, just give me the fastest answer with these LLMs, and it's all running locally. It's pretty kind of a neat little exercise.
Yeah. One of the things I found out kind of going through this is like people think that like this, you know, when I say Spring AI is an abstraction on some of the like LLMs, they're like, oh, this is just something talking to OpenAI. And it's just not the case. Like once you dig in and play with it yourself, you'll understand. But like there are inputs and outputs, right, with an LLM. And an input is a prompt. There's a lot that goes into like building a prompt and like crafting it and then like having an object to work with to send to all the different LLMs. Then there's a response. Like, how do I deal with the response that comes back? And I want to probably turn that into a Java object, right? So it gives me all the tools to do that with. And that makes it so much easier.
And again, right, the same thing is happening over on Spring Data, and I just can't get this comparison out of my mind. On Spring Data, I'm connecting to MySQL or Postgres. The things that are returned, the way that things are returned from the database, even outside of JDBC, the exceptions that are thrown, those are handled in a consistent way. So the way that things are translated between the data tier and Spring Data, it makes sense. It's consistent. And I get that same thing happening over on Spring AI. So yeah, these patterns are consistent across the board.
Yep. I don't know why I think I'm like logged in as you somehow. I just popped that up. But
you select okay. the other one. There you go.
There we go. Cool. So yeah, there's the just check out the Free Code Camp YouTube channel if you want to check out that video. Also, what else is going on? I'm going to Atlanta tomorrow to visit the Atlanta Java user group. So that's going to be exciting. We're going to be talking about Spring Boot 3. I'll get to do a lot of live coding. It's not like crammed into an hour, so I have free time to just hack away, which is nice.
So nice. That's so nice.
And man, I've from afar, I've like seen like the crowds at the Atlanta Java user group because everybody like Pratika is always kind of posting those. All our friends in Atlanta like post those pictures of the user group, and I'm like, wow, it's a really well attended user group. Probably on par with like the New York Java user group and the San Francisco Java user group. So I'm excited to go there. Yeah, it should be fun. So quick trip to Atlanta.
Kansas City Java user group has Marcus from Baden.
Ooh,
coming
nice.
in. Again, surprise, Spring AI. Talking about
nice.
AI and building a chatbot in 15 minutes, I think is the
I have seen a version of that talk. Actually, I've seen two versions of that talk. One online. I think one was posted at Box Days recently. So I got to see that, which was cool. Yeah. And then, I'm drawing a blank now. I'm getting old. So who is the gentleman, Lawrence, who works with Marcus? He did a stand-in for him at a conference I was at last year and kind of did a similar talk. So it's a great talk. You guys are lucky to have him. He's going to be in person?
He's going to be in person. Yep.
Nice.
I think he's hitting Chicago's Java user group, and then he's coming to Kansas City.
Awesome. So that'll be fun.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, I think that's all the kind of intro stuff I had. Again, ask your questions here in the live stream. I know a lot of stuff has been coming in. We'll go back through and see if we can't find some questions here and go through them. But if you want, ask your questions. Another place to do so, we'll get there in a second, but I have a question that we can answer later in the episode. We have a new discussion board on one of our repositories. It's a really good place to ask your questions. I'll show that off when we get to it.
I have a question for the audience. If you are using AI, ML, you're doing these magical new things that are available in our ecosystem. What are you using AI for today? You don't have to give us details, but if you could give us a sense of how you're using AI, not just in your development day-to-day, but in your product. Are you using AI in any of your products? I'd love to hear about how you're doing that, especially if you're doing it with Spring.
Yeah, I would be very curious in that too, because I think, not a lot of the use cases are not going to be like your traditional chat GPTs, right? Like you and I as consumers or developers, like I might have a question. I might go to chat GPT and say like, how do I do this? Right. And have a conversation, get some answers, and then use that. I think in an application, at least like from a business standpoint, what I see is like a huge gain, at least in Spring AI here, is some of the RAG stuff, like being able to like provide your own documents and say like, hey, if you can't find an answer in the LLM, here is some up-to-date information on the thing that you're probably looking for, whether it's documentation or my own product. The example I built out last week was like, hey, I asked ChatGPT, what sports are going to be in the 2024 Summer Olympics this year in Paris? It doesn't know that. But if you provide it some documents and say, hey, these are some answers to those questions, if somebody asks that, then you can go ahead and help that. So I think that's pretty cool as well.
I think it's funny that you said traditional LLMs.
Yeah.
When I think of AI and ML, I don't think of LLMs being the traditional part. I think of like computer vision and the crazy, what I guess was algebra, linear regressions, etc. But I think of like the computer vision things that have come out of that space as being the most traditional. So yeah, that was just a funny, clever little thing. And I'm spending a lot of time back on that, on how we can interface with the NVIDIA GPU with Java, and some of the interesting things coming out of Ampere and what they're doing around AI and making available as well. Lots of cool stuff in the space.
Cool. I got a question here I want to go ahead and throw up. So this comes on the heels of, I did a video last week on Open Rewrite because the plugin for IntelliJ used to be something you had to install. Now it's automatically bundled with it. So if you add like a YAML recipe in there, it has like the icon and you can run it from there and you can do dry runs. So this question from Mikhail. Dan, how difficult is it to write a plugin for Open Rewrite? P.S. Did not watch your video with Open Rewrite yet. And yeah, thanks for the course. Is there a direct link on the list of resources? So let's go through a few of these things. So when you say plugin, I'm guessing you're probably talking about a recipe. So we talk about recipes being the scripts, if you will, that automate the process of like, hey, I want to move from Java 8 to Java 17 or Spring Boot 2.7 to Spring Boot 3.0. I don't know how easy is relative to whatever you're doing, right? The nice thing is a lot of these recipes that are out on the Open Rewrite website, all open source. So if you want to get some ideas of how these recipes are written, that's a great place to start. Look at a simple one, find like an easy one. One of the easy ones I demoed off was if you're in like a JUnit test, you can have static imports for like assertions dot. Well, I use the fully qualified name, and then the rewrite recipe would go through and take those off and add the static imports. That's probably like a simple use case of something similar that you might do. So go look at the source code for that and see how it does it. So I won't say it's simple. I mean, you have to follow the way that parser works. But there's plenty of examples to do it. And I think if you start at ground zero and work your way up, you can accomplish whatever you want. And again, DaShaun always says this when we're talking about migrations, like you have to like take what's there and try to get like 80% of the way. And there's probably going to be things that you can't automate from a recipe that's out there. So yeah, being able to write your own recipes is a valuable resource, and Open Rewrite is just awesome. So
I will say, check out Tim Tabik, his resources. Actually, I'll put his Twitter link. He has done a ton of content on writing Open Rewrite recipes.
awesome.
So check out his work. And if we say his name 3 times, sometimes he actually shows up.
If he appears.
Tim Tabik. Tim Tabik.
Well, we'll see.
Sometimes.
Maybe he'll show up.
Security Live's showing up. So that was close. Both amazing in the space.
Yeah, and one more question you had on that there was, is there a direct link on the list of resources? Yes. So if you're new to the show, we put out a list of resources over on our GitHub. So github.com/spring-office-hours. There's a learning resources for Spring, and there's a whole bunch of resources on there. We've got like almost 600 stars on that organization. A bunch of people have committed to it. And yes, there is a section for upgrading. There's a link to Open Rewrite on there, and I think there's like a couple links under there for Open Rewrite. So definitely check that out.
Fantastic.
Just checking here. Any questions?
I see this one. This is from a friend. Security Live, hello, welcome. Yes, the YOLO example, I believe NVIDIA has a Java JDK for that specifically, and all the other stuff we've kind of talked about, the LLMs. I'm happy to circle back and handle that one offline, but yeah, there are options for the OpenCV, there's integrations as well. So yeah, you have tons of options, but yeah, there's a SDK for YOLO on the NVIDIA developer website or on their open source community website, one of those two. Yeah.
All right, and then Simon says, now the brave question, has Spring Shell been tested on Windows and Java 22 given the console change? I don't know the answer to that. I don't even know what console change you're referring to, so
I don't
not. So maybe you could share this.
Java 22. I got a Windows machine right there, so I'll take it for a spin. Like, why not be the first?
Speaking of Java 22, what's happening this week?
Tomorrow. It's coming tomorrow. So, like, if you're still on Java 17, you're like way behind. Java 21 is beyond middle age. Java 22 is going to be GA tomorrow. Some point, isn't there like a online like release party? They're gonna introduce all the key features, etc. I think we should probably find a link or at least put that in the show notes. So yeah, tomorrow Java 22 is what we're gonna be using.
That's awesome. I was a little bit disappointed to see the 2 other Project Looms are now in another preview, but from a standpoint of let's make sure we get it right, I completely understand that. So I'm okay with that.
Speaking of Java,
is there a document describing package by feature that you can recommend? So there's a bunch of stuff. On this show, we've talked about package by feature versus package by layer versus Spring Modulith, different ways to architect your application. In the new Spring Boot 3 course on Free Code Camp, I use package by feature. And I also have a video on my YouTube channel about that. So there's that. And then anything, if you go over to like this Spring Modulith project, the documentation there talks a lot about being able to like different ways that you can architect your application and why Spring Modulith is a really good answer to that. So I would check that out.
There's like lots of cool stuff. I got to click on this one. This is just like, it's exciting. I want to see it. Like, GitHub repo or it didn't happen, like share. Like, we love hearing these stories, and I love taking the work that you have done in the community and taking that for a spin. That gets me excited. So, yeah.
Just for anybody on the podcast, on the audio side of things, it says, I used OpenAI RAG vector database and it was a lot of fun. Agree. I was having fun with that last week. The result, enhancing the content of the PDF without any hallucinations. It's funny. I did a I did a question to like a endpoint in Spring that talked to OpenAI, and I posted the screenshot on Twitter. And I basically said, "What's the most popular Java framework out there?" And it responded with the Spring framework, of course. And I'm like, "Well, no hallucinations here." So that was fun.
Excellent.
Cool. All right. I think we've gotten through most of the questions here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen for those of you at home. We are taking a look at calendar.spring.io. And if you're not aware, this is a really good place to kind of get caught up with all of the different releases happening in our ecosystem. Today is Monday, March 18th. 2024. And as I'm looking at this week, DaShaun, there is a lot of things going on.
There's a lot.
Around AMQP, Kafka, Pulsar, Spring Security, Spring Authorization Server, Spring Integration, which we're kind of getting into that realm. Spring Session. Something stands out for me on the 21st, on Thursday. We have Spring Boot 3.1, Spring Boot 3.2.4, and Spring Boot 3.3.0, milestone number 3, which means we are getting really, really close to a 3.3 release, and that's exciting. So, man, we are on the heels of Java 22 and Spring Boot 3.3.
I'm wondering, I think it was last week, there was a good little conversation about JMS versus AMQP, and our teammate, Josh Long, actually wrote a blog post about it. On the differences between JMS and AMQP and why he's a fan of AMQP. And I didn't realize all of the bits that were explained there, but it was absolutely a good conversation.
Awesome.
Check that out. But yeah,
cool.
I saw the blog that you just pulled up.
Oh, yeah. So I wanted to mention this too. This was going around the Twitter sphere or X sphere. I don't know what to call it ever. I'm still calling it Twitter. This was going around. I haven't had a chance to go through this because so basically, I was seeing a lot of people saying, do not upgrade if you're on Mac to macOS 14.4 if you are a Java developer, because there were some things happening and things were not working. But I also saw some people saying, I've upgraded and it's working fine for me. So I'm still not sure who it's affecting. Do you know who this is affecting, or is it affected you at all?
So I am of this mindset and this this position where I'm taking updates frequently and quickly. Like, I want to be on the latest and greatest, so this is part of my position. And this event was one that made me step back and think, like, hey, maybe this is one of those points where it could be a problem, because here's what's different. With Mac OS, you can't undo. It's not easy to roll back a version unless you've got a, what is it? The timekeeper box thing.
Yeah.
Time machine.
Time machine. I was just saying.
So this is an interesting case, but still, I have taken the upgrade. I've had the upgrade installed, and I have not ran into this issue specifically that I know of. But it's one of those ones that's kind of hard to identify and hard to replicate, because it's based on the architecture and a change that did not exist as they were making these releases. It's crazy. It says it is affecting all Java versions from Java 8 to the early access builds of JDK 22. So that is pretty much everybody. and it did not affect those versions on the pre-releases that they'd put out into the community. So it's something that came in late between the last pre-release and what they pushed out GA. Well, this just kind of reinforces my mentality that I never update to something the day of. I always kind of wait around and make sure nobody's yelling on Twitter to see if I should go ahead and update. This update came out 10 days ago. Oh, really? Yeah. Wow. So yeah, I'm still kind of leaning into I'm pulling out. I'm doing all the updates every day, rebooting my computers every day. So I'm getting the latest and greatest. I don't know if there's a term for that, but that's where I'm at. And this is one use case where, it might come back to bite me, but it hasn't yet. Well, everybody should just follow me and be a procrastinator, because every time you see that box, I say, I'll wait.
not yet. I'll do it tomorrow. And tomorrow is turned into 10 days now. So.
And I am fighting that one. That whole stance of, hey, I'm going to wait. I think that this is fine. It's working for me now. I'm not going to upgrade, because if I get into that habit, what if it was a CVE, right? What if that last update was, patching a hole that didn't exist? If I'm not on this posture of taking the updates, taking the security fixes, taking all the performance boosts that I get, and I'm gonna err on the side of getting the most bang for the buck out of everything that I'm taking to production. But yeah, I guess more to come, right? This isn't the first time. It's not the last time that this is going to happen. So yeah, This story will evolve. But right now, this is how I'm moving forward.
Cool. All right. I figured, like I said, I have at least one question on our discussion board, which we'll talk about a little bit later. I figured we jump into our topic today, which is Spring Batch. So for those of you at home, spring.io, anytime I want to learn, we talked about this on our learning resources. Like if something is new to me in the Spring world, like I have this kind of pattern that I follow, and we talked about this, but one of the first places I go is to the documentation. So I'm going to go to spring.io. I'm going to go to projects. Spring Batch is right on that list.
Fantastic.
I click Spring Batch. You're given an overview of everything of what Spring Batch is. I'm just going to read the first sentence. We're not going to go through and read all of this, but it says a lightweight, comprehensive batch framework designed to enable the development of robust batch applications vital for daily operations of enterprise systems. And yes, that's one of the main use cases, but as we'll talk about today, it's not just for enterprises, right? It's for tinkering as well. So anytime you have like a batch operation. So I guess that's a really good place to start there. Use cases. Like what would I reach for Spring Batch for?
So let's remind the audience that Java's been around for a long time. Computers have been around for a pretty long time. And there's a bunch of systems in place that have been around for a long time. And Java has kind of, been there for at least the last 25 years. Almost 30 years.
28. Yeah, almost 30.
So Java's seen things. Spring has been around for at least the last 20 years of this. So what shouldn't be surprising is when you think back and you think of what older systems look like and how we used to do things, it shouldn't be a surprise that there are a lot of batch systems. Those batch systems are doing things like data migrations, data conversions, right? Think of, you maybe have heard the term COBOL, the language that's running on a lot of mainframes, right? There's a lot of these COBOL systems that are in place that for financial institutions, there's some large percentage of every financial transaction still goes through COBOL somewhere. So you have these systems that are in place that aren't really tied to the rest of the ecosystem. So you need to transform, you need to migrate some of this data and transform, especially these financial institutions and the financial data, where it doesn't need to be in real time for a lot of these things, but it does need to happen with like exact, perfect, consistency and validity that can be audited and confirmed. Like, hey, all of these, even the 1 cent transactions, did what they were supposed to do and got to the places that they needed to get to.
So one of the terms I've heard a lot in this arena is ETL, extract, transform, load. Basically, like I'm extracting it from this one legacy system or this one like set of files, right? I'm transforming some data and I'm loading it into another system. And that kind of what you said there is like, hey, we have a lot of different systems trying to talk to each other, and this is one like way that they can do it, right?
Yeah, it's there's abstractions inside of Spring Batch that are item reader, the extract, item processor, which is the transform, and item writer, the load. So you have these different abstractions, again, just like on top of everything else that we find, they've made these abstractions really nice and easy to consume. But Spring Batch has tons of use cases, and you might be surprised to find out that it's actually one of the most popular projects out there in the Spring ecosystem.
It is. And I was looking, I knew this before because we've talked about it before, and I've remember some of this, but I was reminded of it when I was on the Spring Batch page, kind of prepping for this show, that our good friend Michael Manila on the Spring team, who's now basically the director of Spring R&D, used to be a Spring Batch lead. And you will find his name over all of this. Like, he's got books on it. He's got online trainings over on the O'Reilly Learning Center. He's got so much information. So I don't know. Maybe we could. Maybe
next time we do this.
Away.
Yeah, next time we do this topic, we'll see if we can bring him in.
We'll do like a little trip down memory lane with Michael on Spring Batch. But
we'd have to find a long show for sure.
We'd have to find some time though. Michael's a busy man. So, but yeah. So the other thing you'll find on a lot of these the landing page for different projects is not just like what it is, but hey, here's some books, here's some online courses, here's some video trainings, here's a bunch of other videos that you can go through. So there's a lot of resources on this page that you can go through and take a look at if you want to get started with it. Another one I will say is our friend Josh Long over on Coffee Software on his YouTube channel. He's got a live streaming playlist of like, I don't know, 20 videos where he went through and just did a whole bunch of stuff. He was finding use cases for it for something he was working on. So again, not just enterprises. Yeah, just like this. So he went through and did a whole bunch of videos on Spring Batch. So if you're interested, check that out.
Harpreet has a use case. Harpreet says, I do use batch jobs to process CSV files from the customer that do validation, update, or create records. Custom batch. Willing to use Spring Batch. This is something you should take a look at. Harpreet, thanks for being here. And this is exactly it.
And to kind of stay on that topic, like, why wouldn't you just use a normal application? Why wouldn't you just say, let me just write a Spring endpoint to talk to the CSV file and do it? What are some reasons?
Yep. How many of those do you want? There's the transaction management. That's one thing, is like, hey, we've got to make sure that this happens once and exactly once. There's the, making sure that only happens, maybe it's once in a day or once in an hour. A process for having unique IDs for each run, but then also an ability to retry things that didn't work.
I was going to say, what if 1 of 1,000 fails? Like, what happens then?
You don't want to have to do the whole thing over. So Spring Batch gives you a mechanism for being able to retry, but it goes even deeper than that. It can actually save you from having to write. If you're doing millions of rows of data in seconds, or again, reference to the 1 billion row challenge. If you're processing billions of rows in minutes and you want to prevent all of that from being written to a database, you want to prevent the IO, so you chunk the data. Spring Batch has this ability to chunk the data so that you can limit the number of writes, but also depending on where you're writing, it has different mechanisms to say, hey, I want to make sure that these things happen before I write to the database. So you can pass environment variables effectively between jobs and steps. And each one of those has a different mechanism for when it's going to be written to the database. So you can make sure that the data that gets represented in the database is exactly what you want. So there's a lot of really interesting hooks and mechanisms provided to give you different points at where you want to write to the database and how you want to handle exceptions and retries.
Yep. So I'm in the reference documentation. If you go to Spring Batch Introduction, this is a really good place to start to find like usage scenarios, right? A typical batch program generally, one, reads a large number of records from a database, a file, or a queue, processes the data in some sort of fashion, and then writes back data in a modified form. So that goes for me back to ETL, right? So that's a typical batch program. And then there's a bunch of like business scenarios there, like, hey, I want to do some concurrent batch processing. I can do parallel processing of a job, manual or scheduled restart after failure. There's a bunch of really great business process in here. Again, for me, the documentation is a great place to start. It kind of gives you that overview, and then you could jump into this is like the nuts and the bolts. Now there's like an architecture behind the Spring Batch. For me, as I'm starting to learn this is a little bit too much. This is like, let me go through and like figure out how to like write my first job. Mm-hmm. Then I'll come back and read this, because then it might make more sense. If I dive, I don't know how you learn, but that's for me, like, this is next step.
Yep. So think of your first job is a batch. It's something I don't want running 24/7. It's something that might take hours or days to run, to complete, right? Whatever the data set, one of Josh's examples was video game sales. An example that might be more relatable to you is all of the analytics that you have to capture from all the places that you're delivering content. A batch job, you don't need running 24/7. It's something that, hey, maybe at the end of the day, I want to get metrics from Twitter, from YouTube, from Free Code Camp, etc. You run a batch job that goes out, and it can just be calling it a RESTful endpoint and pulling some metrics and storing it into a database. It can be as simple as that. But it could also be as, complex as, hey, going and pulling down, to Harpreet's example, pulling down 1 billion rows of data from a customer's endpoint and doing validation or transacting on that data. And it might take hours. But another piece that you get here is, if you've ever tried to do these types of things with a large data set, you've tried to figure out how to keep track of where the batch job is at in the process, giving some visibility outside of the job to see where it's at, or did it get stuck, right? If you're 10 hours into a 24-hour batch job, how do you know that it's still running? This is one of those things that Spring Batch does. It can give you that insight, and it also gives you hooks for how to restart or retry or stop in the middle of a process. So the cool thing for me is that this was built with the ecosystem. It was built with organizations that do these massive batch processes for financial institutions all over the world. So we are getting inside of Spring Batch all these best practices from our ecosystem that's been doing this at scale for years or more.
Yeah, there's a question here and it made me think of something
Great
I used to work
question.
on, but it says, is Spring Batch, can it be used to synchronize transactional data between two databases? And when I think of this, one of the terms that comes to mind is data warehouse, right? At the enterprise level, you have a database that is like, this is our record of state. This is like an actual look into our customer data or whatever. But what they'll end up doing is pulling a lot of this data out and putting it into a data warehouse somewhere else, because this is where I'm running all of the reports off of. I'm not running this on my production database that is being used all the time. I run all that against something else. So that'd be a great use case for this. I'm extracting data from this database. I may be transforming it to a different representation of the data to put it into that data warehouse. So yeah, I think that's definitely something that a good use case for that. What do you think?
But now it's not going to be synchronous, right? I can synchronize. I can make a replication. This is definitely a use case. One of the other examples that might fit here is I hate to say it, active passive, where I'm doing a batch of like, hey, yeah, let me get a copy of that, the last hour, and let me, set it up into another database. So up into some point in time, I've got every transaction that happened represented in both databases.
Awesome.
But yeah, when I'm trying to synchronize, I think of a slightly different process in the way of change data capture. So as something gets written to the log or the transaction happens in one database, then I can send that exact same thing to be written into a duplicate.
Yep.
Yeah,
okay.
Good question.
How is this different from frameworks like Spark, and what scenarios are best to use Spring Batch over Spark?
Well, here's an example. So Spark is more about eventing, I think, but I think there's a lot of overlap as well, where with Spring Batch, one of the examples that comes to mind is I want to truncate. I want to my backups. I want to take all the data that's older than a week, and I want to take it off of my spinning disks or my SSD, and I want to move it to like an S3 storage on a cloud. And then maybe all the data that's older than a month, I want to take it off of my S3 data, my S3 storage, and I want to put it on long-term ice, whatever implementation you have, on tape drives. And those types of processes that don't need to happen 24/7 all the time, they're at a point in time, and they might take hours to run. Another example. So there's going to be overlap, But yeah, these financial transactions, like at the end of the day, the bank
Hmm.
statement, right?
Yep.
You can't go back and change that. After that day of business is done, those
Hmm.
transactions, hit the rest of the environment. What you're working on the next day is the next day's statement, but everything after that, that's a batch process. Those transactions are done. They get the transfers go to the different banks, the records are set, but you're not going to edit things that happened, 5 days in the past. The
Cool.
transactions are done.
Got another good question here from Stig. Is it possible to run Spring Batch as an Azure function? Functions as a service.
Yes, but why would you not want to do that? Batch functions are set up to
Yeah.
do long running processes.
Right.
But what a transition. We have another implementation of something that might just want to run and be done, but you want to have a record of the status and how long did it take. You want to have some meta information, metadata around what happened. And that brings to mind Spring Cloud Task. And another implementation for doing these one-off processes that don't need to stay up 24/7,
Hmm.
that are just doing one thing and doing it well. And it has that same schema to provide the metadata that you might want to track for something that's short run, but could also be scheduled to do at certain times and do something specific. This would work in an Azure function, but in an Azure function, you're paying per millisecond. So be very careful what type of workload you're putting into an Azure function.
Yeah, and as you said, some of these batch jobs could take days or weeks or months, and like now you're gonna be paying a lot for that.
Yeah.
So that's probably not a good use case for doing those long running processes. But spring.io/projects, Spring Cloud Task. If you want to go ahead and learn a little bit more about that, that would be a good place to start.
Yeah.
Um,
The nice thing about these two is the scheduling. One thing we didn't get to on the Spring Cloud Batch, it also has a mechanism. If I've got something that's been taking 48 hours to run because it was running on one machine or one cluster of machines, if it's financial data, maybe I need it to go a little bit faster. Or maybe there's some other reason I need that report done within 24 hours. So you can actually distribute, you can shard your jobs and you can distribute those jobs at scale because Spring Batch gives you those mechanisms. So you can slice the data and you can fire up remote workers, for example, to handle those batch jobs and merge the output back. So you can actually speed up your batch jobs.
I got just a quick comment from our friend Jonathan on the Spring team. It says, FYI, one of the authors of Spring Batch was also a part of the specification experts group on JSR 352 batch applications for the Java platform. So that's pretty cool. I think that's just a long way of saying, man, there's some really smart people involved in these Spring projects.
As always, as always.
Um,
But Jonathan, since you're here, I have a question for you. What my default when I'm creating a batch, when I'm creating a Spring project, is I want to have observability. What type of observability do I want to be thinking about in these batch jobs? Because I get a lot of the metadata on how the jobs and steps are executed. I can capture those kind of metrics. But what else might I be considering as far as observability of a batch job? So I'll throw that out there. If you can answer, that'd be awesome.
Haprit threw a comment up in our live stream here. It says, The Definitive Guide to Spring Batch is a good book, and that is what I am currently reading. So
Excellent.
cool. Thanks for that. All right. So batch jobs. Do you have like any recent personal use cases that you've used Spring Batch on?
Yes, the analytics. So that's the fun one is I took our Spring Office Hours repo and I had a batch job that says, hey, go and grab all the repositories from this org. It needed a token that had permissions to that GitHub org, for example. But then it just grabs all the repositories and there's a daily information metric that you can pull down from the REST API. And I get, hey, our repositories are getting 500 views a day, hundreds of unique users every day on it. So beyond the stars and the forks, we're getting hundreds of unique users every day. And I get that data.
That's a really good use case. And I know that Well, let's come back to that in a second, but that's a really good use case. So again, not taking like a large database or file and transforming it and putting it into something else. But as you said, this is something that needs to run every day to collect metrics. So reporting is probably another really good use case for batch processing. And I think this is something I need to look at because we've talked about this before. We even did some work together on a CLI program last year that basically went out to YouTube and got all of my recent videos and got the current like view count so that I could report on them. But this is a manual process. I need to run it. And then I have multiple things that I need to do this for. So batch processing sounds like a good workflow here. Like I could just have it run once a day, go out to Twitter, find out what my subscriber count is, go out to YouTube, get my last videos, find out what those counts are, and give me all of those metrics that I need to report to our boss on to say, like, these are the things that I'm working on. So anything that needs to run on a scheduled task. So that brings up a good question. What's the difference between this and a scheduled task?
Why wouldn't I just cool thing is I can take a Spring Cloud task and a Spring Batch application, and I can set them up as a Kubernetes cron. So that is one way. There's also the @scheduled where I can have it running, but then it's running. Remember, I run on Raspberry Pis, so I can't afford to have things just running 24/7 when they don't need to be. So I use the Kubernetes cron type to deploy these on a schedule. So it starts, and in the same Spring Batch code, I can have multiple jobs defined, and I can say, hey, I would like to start the Twitter analytics job. In the same jar file or in the same container. Hey, I would like to start the YouTube analytics job. Just passing in the information to say, run this job. But it could still exist in the same application, jar file, for example.
Cool. I love it. Just another thing that I have got to find some time to do. Cool. I got a couple more things here. Let me see. First off, Jonathan says, Spring Batch is instrumented with Micrometer. You will get a lot of data about your in-progress or finished jobs metrics and tracing as well. A comment is short for this, but the docs show them.
Excellent.
Cool. Thank you for that. Another thing I've seen mentioned in the chat is, I think Spring Cloud Dataflow is a tool to operate these batches similar to Airflow. Do you know what Airflow is? I know what Spring Cloud Dataflow is, but I've not heard of Airflow.
I've not had my hands on Airflow, but this is the answer. Spring Cloud Dataflow is a tool. I hate to say it because I know I'm not giving it justice, but Spring Cloud Dataflow for me, first of all, is like the UI for Spring Batch, but it also allows me to, with a drag and drop kind of interface, allows me to connect streams and batches and tasks to give myself a data workflow. It's an amazing, powerful tool. And if that's something that you'd be interested in seeing here on the show, do me a favor and put a +1 in the chat, because I think that would be a great topic. And it's another one of our most popular features and tool sets that I run into with our customers.
Like I said, the Spring ecosystem is massive, DaShaun. Different projects for different solutions to all of the things that we're all working on. We're just not all working on them at the same time. So this is one of those things that I need to dive into a little bit more. And like you said, I think one of the best ways to learn something is to find like a good use case for it personally. And for me, I have a use case now. So I have a reason to like want to tinker with this and like see how it works. So we're getting all the +1s. So
there's lots of thank you for that in chat. And that's definitely something that's on our radar. And whether we show it here or maybe it'll be on Cloud Foundry Weekly, because Cloud Foundry gives us a nice way to deploy Spring Cloud Dataflow. So stay tuned. I think we have a good enough response here where we can definitely put that on the calendar.
Cool.
Excellent.
All right. Anything else you want to kind of cover on an introduction level to Spring Batch? Anything else we want to talk about?
There was a question about the Spring scheduler and scheduling a batch job. So you can do this. One of the other interesting places is we've been talking about Modulith. I could have these batch jobs that aren't actively running or doing anything, I could have those scheduled as part of my modulith. Like do this thing every Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Run this batch. I can do that. And what it's doing is it can fire off that batch job, and that batch job will keep track of all of the processes that it takes. So I can have that retry mechanism. I can have that start stop mechanism. I can have the transaction management needed for some of those jobs.
Cool. I see another question here. I need to move 5 million rows of data from one Azure database to another. What's a good approach to this? The question is whether should I first copy the data into a CSV, then process to DB from a DB. Using a DB, is using batch a good solution for this?
So again, I was wrong. I used to think everything in terms of an event stream, and this is the way we're going to go. But money is a problem. If I'm going to do the change data capture approach where, hey, something gets written to a database and I want to replicate it on the other side, and I'm doing that for each one, there's the ingress egress cost of each of those transactions. Mm-hmm. If I don't need to have the real time in that second database, if I could do it at the end of the day, do an export, kick it over to the other database. I could do an import. It doesn't have to be Spring Batch in that case. But if you only wanted to get transactions for a certain part of that data, that's one of your options. You could write it out to a CSV, send it over, and then bring it back up. It depends. But
would it make
a good use case?
Would it make a big difference? And I'm just guessing from the context of the question, but what would it make a difference if this was just a one-time operation? Like, hey, for whatever reason, I need to take 5 million rows of data, move them over to another database, and then I'm done with that.
Right.
Like you said,
import export.
Probably just replicate that data.
One of the good things is like, what if I wanted to have a different key? A lot of times you have regional data. Mm-hmm. Right, where hey, this is the original data came out of America, but now I'm deploying it over to EMEA, and I want to put a key in that database that says this data, this result is coming from EMEA. Yeah. So not only can you do that, handle that 5 million rows of data, but you can also transform it or enhance it, or enrich it in some way.
Yep. Yeah, I guess it just matters on what you're trying to do there. So.
Yep. So and he even adds on that there is data manipulation. So this is exactly the use case. This is a great use case for Spring Batch.
I got a question from the show earlier. I just wanted to get to, do we have a detailed migration guide for Sleuth to Micrometer as a migration guide is GitHub is not helping? So Jonathan's here. Maybe he can answer that, but I know it depends what you're trying to do, right? So one of the things that kind of changed in Spring Boot 3 is that you no longer need Sleuth for distributed tracing. So for me, that is, let's get rid of that other dependency and see what we need to kind of update to get to that point. I think that's a good migration to do. You're getting rid of dependency. You're losing some weight, if you will, on your app. But there's documentation on moving to Micrometer for the distributed tracing. So I'm not sure exactly what your use case is for that, but we'll see if Jonathan can throw in an answer here for us.
Here's another great use case for Spring Batch. PR Panda says, I tried to schedule some of my jobs using Spring Scheduler, but faced issues when I have multiple instances of the same scheduling service running. With Spring Batch, you have a mechanism that you can only do it one time. You can make sure that a batch job that ran at 5 p.m. only gets ran once, and each one of those steps, each row in the database only gets manipulated once, for example. So these are some of those mechanisms that are built into Spring Batch that you don't get with just Spring Scheduler alone.
Cool. All right. I have another question here, but I'm going to ask for a little bit more clarity, and this will go into the next thing I wanted to talk about. But it says, I want all the values in a request body to be trimmed automatically. How to achieve this? I guess I would just need a little more info on what you're exactly trying to do. Because, you could take in a request body and then
as a map.
You can convert that into whatever object you're trying to convert to. There's a way to do that. I guess just let me know a little bit more about that. And one way that you can do that, DaShaun, is we have this new discussion forum over here. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in the chat. So if you are not on the live stream or you're watching this replay, there is a GitHub repo at github.com/spring-office-hours. And then the Spring Office Hours podcast repo. We've enabled the discussion board. So when I get questions through email or Twitter, I'm going to put them on here. If you have questions that you want to answer, you can go ahead and put those in here. So if you have some more context on that question of adjusting the request body or having it trimmed automatically, if you throw it in here, this is a great place for us to go ahead and take a look at it. If you have a repo, that is always helpful too. Hey, here's a repo of something going wrong, so that we can just git clone run and take a look at it ourselves. But I do have a question on here that I wanted to get to this week, and it comes from WebFox. And again, if you don't want your name, you can always just say, hey, please don't include my name on the show. Then we won't do that. It says, hi, Vega. Yeah, okay. I've been writing Java for 2 years now, but I still feel like I'm somewhere between beginner and immediate. What can I do to move that to an intermediate level? So first off, I've been writing Java since the early ages of development. You know, I went to school and I learned Java. So this is 23 years. I still feel at times that I'm intermediate. So
Same.
my first like kind of suggestion / advice is, I don't know if that feeling ever goes away. So just have a little patience and continue to like kind of hone your craft. So I will say anytime like I'm trying to like figure something like this out, I always start with what is the end goal? Like, what is your goal with this? Are you working at a job now where you're writing Java? Are you trying to get a job as a Java developer? So always start with a goal and kind of work your way backwards, right? If it was to get a job as a Java developer, what are the jobs that you're trying to apply for? What are the skills that they're asking you to have? Figure those out and really kind of hone in on those. Then once you get that job, I feel like if you're not on the job, it's really hard to like get some of that experience. So your first task is to really get that job as a Java developer, right? Then on the job, you're going to get a lot of experience, and you're going to probably get some experience in different areas and things you might not have done on your own. So I think for me, the biggest thing over my career has been job experience, being put into positions where I was like, I don't know how to do that. I got to learn how to do that, right? And building out some like real world scenarios. So again, I would have to know exactly what your end goal is here. But other than that, I would just say, keep working at it. Don't get frustrated. You're only 2 years in. Again, been doing this for a long time, and I feel like that at times. So don't let that frustrate you. Have some patience and just keep working at it.
One
DaShaun?
thing I will say, as I have this concept of a T-shaped, the Spring ecosystem is wide, and you can know a little bit about each of the projects. Like you go through the guides or the simple examples that are in each project. You consider yourself a beginner. The only way to get to deep understanding of something is to do more of it. You can't learn something by doing it once and become an intermediate or senior level, but you don't have to learn it all. Find something, find a project, find something that you get a lot of reps in and go deep in that. And the way to do that is by doing more reps of one thing and become intermediate or advanced in one thing before you move on to the next. That's my advice.
Yeah, and it's always hard to like, okay, well, I'm new to Java and I really like want to work with collections more. It's really hard to sit down and just like write mundane string array of colors equals this and loop over that. If you've done that already, great, but put that into practice. Like I'm building a REST API in Spring, and now I have to deal with all of those things. Like I'm working with collections a lot. I'm learning how to like add and delete or modify a collection, right? I'm working with variables. I'm getting that like hands-on real world experience. So as DaShaun said, like you can always watch all of the things, read all of the things, listen to all the things, but you got to be doing. So find ways to build stuff. I always say find ways to like build things that are interesting to you, that are relative to you, because they become much more tangible. They become more meaningful. If you're building a recipe index and you don't like to cook or not really into food, like that, it's not going to help you out, right? Because you have no interest in it. For me, like it was always early on, I was like, I wanted to build a blog so that I could write blog posts about things that I was coming across. So I like got my hands dirty by building my own blog and like being able to push something to production. So yeah, try to find stuff that's relevant to that, relevant to you, and just keep going.
Get more reps.
You get more reps.
Every rep counts.
Yep. So yeah, that's my question. That's one of the questions I had on here. Again, if you can do so, please go ahead and add a question here, and we will get to those questions on a live stream. With that, I think we've hit our 1 hour mark, DaShaun. That flew by really quick.
Fantastic. Yeah, it did. And yeah, with that, if you get stuck on your path to production, give me a call.
All right. So that'll do it for today. Again, one thing we've been asking, if you want to do us a very big favor, it would be very kind of you.
Just tiny little one. Take a couple of seconds.
Favor. It'll take a couple minutes. If you can, if you are listening to us on a podcast, wherever you get your podcasts from, do us a big favor and just leave a little review. Hopefully you like what we're doing here. If you want to kind of support the show, say, hey, that Dan and DaShaun, they kind of know a thing or two and they're friendly people. So yeah, go listen to that podcast. That would really help us out and we would appreciate it. With that, we have some really great ideas for upcoming shows. But if you have an idea for a show, so we talked about it today, Spring Cloud Data, we talked about that. If you have some ideas for shows, that same discussion board has an ideas section. You can go ahead and say, hey, Dan and DaShaun, I'd really love to see a show on Spring Cloud Task. Can you do that? If you can get those ideas in there, that's what we are here. We are here to serve you, the community.
Absolutely.
We'd love to kind of help you jump into
more Spring Modulith.
Spring Modulith. Yeah.
Stay tuned.
DaShaun, aren't you talking about Spring Modulith soon?
As often as I can. As often as I can. I'm trying to get my reps. My reps in. So I am building everything I can my default way, and then also doing it as a Spring Modulith. This is how I'm going to learn. Cool.
All right. Well, with that, we have some exciting upcoming shows. So stay tuned. Check out springoffstars.io. Follow us on the Twitter sphere, wherever we're calling it. Follow us there, and we are going to have some fun. With that, we will call this a show, and we will see you in the next one.
All right. Take care.